I made a video game, and now I'm going to tell you about it.
The game is called We Fear Our Brothers, a horror game where you navigate a spooky forest trying to hunt down monsters, all the while they are hunting you back.
I made a game diamond. Typical timeline of events? What am I even? Typical timeline of events. I made a game design document outlining the details of the game that I wanted to be part of the game, right? That makes sense. Then I started coding, made a character, had issues with that, made the computer controlled character, had issues with that, had issues with the thing I'd made before because of that. Made a map that you could interact with, had issues with that. Fantastic start, right? Moving on from that, I tried implementing interactable objects, had issues with that, of course, because there was too many, of course, and I couldn't figure out how to solve that. So I implemented a chunk loading system, had issues with that. I had issues with that. And even with that, the previous problem I couldn't figure out. And so, moving on from that, I implemented the states, the character that you can be in. That's important for the gameplay, somewhat, you know. And I implemented options, customizable things, UI, all that jazz. Had issues with almost all of it. That's fantastic. Wasted a lot of time, and so in the end, I couldn't implement everything I wanted to implement, and now we have a game that is complete but not fun at all. I hope you enjoy.
Well, that's not a pleasant face.
But moving on, let's talk more about the issues, failures, and successes I had while making this project. So that way we can, learn. Gotta make this video educational somehow. I guess we'll start with some mistakes, given that one has become abundantly obvious as I've been making this video. I did not do a good job logging the progress of this project as I was working through it. Not only does this mean I lack content for the video, but I'm having a hard time retrieving from memory exactly the issues that I ran into while making the project. A lot of what I did is just kind of a blur in my memory now. You don't care about that.
Exactly, into the good stuff.
And given that, we have the first lesson of the video, which is to log your progress as you're going through it. And this can be done through a few different means. First off, just record more videos of the features you've implemented, as well as the bugs that you've come across. The second thing, which is possibly even more important, is just to write in a digital or physical journal, which could probably be updated daily. Lesson 2 might not be so obvious, but is undoubtedly very important, especially when you start working on some larger projects. This is to hook your project up with GitHub. This allows you to save backups of your project, but it also allows you to keep old versions of your project still available. If I'd done that, I would have been able to go back and record some videos of the old versions. GitHub also enables you to access your project from almost any device, so long as you have the internet, which means I could take my project mobilely, using something like a laptop.
How about the game itself?
Well, let's start with the beginning. The beast. And one defining characteristic of it, organic movement. Semi-organic movement. This required me, for the first time, to use the skeleton 2D node. And while I was able to figure it out for the most part, it seemed to lack some key features that I expected it to have in the first place. The look at skeleton modification doesn't have an option for increasing the amount of joints. I'm sure there's good reason for that, and I can't complain. So I tried my best to work around that and implement the features myself. And that took quite a bit of time and code. So for each of the limbs, I just had them target a specific node using the the CCDIK skeleton modification. Don't ask me what that stands for. I set all of the target nodes to top level to make sure that they did not move with the rest of the body. And then I coded the targets so that way they would reposition in front of you once they've gotten a certain distance away. For the head, chest, core, and hips, no skeleton modifications seemed to provide the features that I needed for them, so I opted to code the whole thing myself. To do this, I coded it to work from top to bottom, rotating each part individually once the previous part had reached its limit. So what's the lesson here? Well, I don't know. I had to do a bunch of coding with rotation, and I'm no mathematician, so I had a hard time understanding a lot of that stuff. And well, I can be pretty stupid sometimes, but lucky for me, Godot provides a lot of things like lerp angle and angle difference, so that way I have an easier time. Once everything was running smooth with the player controller and the map, I moved on to making the computer controller. This is where most of my issues came about, because I needed to use a navigation system, pathfinding. What I wanted was a more dynamic navigation system, with certain regions being more dangerous or costly to walk through, depending on if suspicious activity has occurred there. I tried using avoidance, that didn't work. I tried using procedurally baking everything, but that didn't work either, and it was bound to be very costly in the end. I spent about a week trying to find a good solution for this, but in the end, I just made the enemies run away from dangerous positions as long as they were in a terrified state. This point was about halfway through the project, and I had some predictions about how it was going to go from that point forward. Many of the features I plan on implementing after the navigation system, I think are going to be a lot simpler than what I've been doing thus far, because they don't require me to learn much new things that I don't already understand. And therefore, I should have a good handle of all of them. So hopefully I'm able to get this all done in at least 10 days. But we'll see. And you don't care, do you?
Exactly. Get to the good stuff.
Alright, that's the end of this update. Thank you for watching. Little did I know that I was an idiot. So from that point I had to add the trees, which were physical barriers for the player character and navigational barriers for the computer-controlled beasts. They needed to randomly spawn throughout the map, overlapping trees needed to compete for survival, and then after that, they needed to be used to bake the navigation region for the computer-controlled beasts. I wanted the game to have an abundance of individually interactable leaves. I had a hunch that this was going to have performance issues, but I decided to go through with it anyways. Turns out I was right, and I had to scrap that idea pretty quickly. But it did give me the idea of trying my hands at building a chunk system. So I did what any coder would do. I went online and I found a tutorial for it. The problem was, the tutorial was designed for a single character. I needed chunks to be loaded around both the character and any beast that was spawned in the game. I'm actually glad this turned out to be the case because it forced me to actually analyze and go through all the code to understand what was going on, so that way I could effectively modify into the design that I needed it to use. The next thing on the agenda was to get the trees to work with it. This shouldn't have been complicated, but I ended up spending 3 or 4 hours trying to figure out why the trees were not spawning in their correct locations. It turns out all I needed to do was move one line of code. Setting the global position before adding the child results in it being relative. So from that point, things went pretty smoothly, I would say. I implemented leaf piles, which you could hide in. I updated basically all the textures to make it look a bit prettier. And I implemented the sounds, which not only made sounds so you could hear where things were, but also for the bots to understand what was going on, I had to make a signal sending system to calculate if they could hear what sounds were being made, and they would respond accordingly to that. After that, I basically finalized the game.
And now it's time to move on. While I had a good time making the project, I also had some bad times, and the crunch for time near the end forced me to make some sloppy code and make a big mess of everything. I don't want to navigate through that anymore, and trust me, I've learned my lesson.
So I guess this is the end of the video, and I hope you enjoyed.